Stay awake. Look at me. You are not dying on this plane today." The man's hands slammed down on this woman's chest, one over the other, pressing hard enough to crack ribs. Sweat ran into his eyes. Around him, 40 passengers sat frozen phones raised filming a stranger fight death at 35,000 feet. Nobody helped. Nobody moved. Just him, a tired single father in a wrinkled shirt, kneeling in the aisle counting compressions out loud, while a billionaire's heart refused to beat. And here's the twist. Nobody saw coming. The moment he brought her back. The moment the whole cabin erupted in tears and applause. He grabbed his little girl's hand and vanished. No name, no reward. Gone. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if a good story about second chances still means something to you, hit that subscribe button and stay with me all the way to the end. Because what this man was running from will break your heart. Daniel Hayes had a rule he never told anyone about. Whenever a stranger asked him what he used to do for a living, he lied. "Maintenance," he'd say. "I keep the lights on at the airport." It wasn't the whole truth. It wasn't even half of it. But it was the only version of himself he could say out loud, without his chest going tight. So it was the version he carried around like a card in his wallet, ready to hand over whenever somebody got too curious. That morning at 4:47 a.m., nobody was curious about him at all. He was standing at the kitchen counter in a house that was too quiet spreading peanut butter on white bread, listening to the sound of his 8-year-old daughter brushing her teeth down the hall. He counted the strokes without meaning to. Old habit. Count everything. Count the seconds, count the breaths, count the beats. He caught himself doing it and set the knife down harder than he meant to. "Mia," he called. 2 minutes. We can't miss this flight." "I know, Dad." Her voice came around the corner before she did toothpaste on her chin, one sock on. "You already said that 4 times. Because you already moved slow 4 times. She grinned at him, and for a second, just a second, his heart did something it hadn't done in a long while. She had her mother's grin. That crooked, unbothered get-away-with-anything grin. Sarah used to smile like that in the mornings, standing right where Mia was standing now, coffee in one hand, arguing with him about whose turn it was to drive. Daniel turned back to the sandwiches so his daughter wouldn't see his face. "Grandpa's really sick, huh?" Mia said. It wasn't a question. She'd figured that out on her own the way kids do from the phone calls he took in the garage with the door closed. "He's sick," Daniel said carefully. "That's why we're going. So you can see him and he can see you. That'll do him good." "Is he gonna die?" Daniel stopped moving. He'd promised himself after Sarah that he would never lie to this child about death. He'd broken a lot of promises in the last 5 years. That one he intended to keep. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Not today, but maybe soon. That's why we go now while there's time. You understand?" She nodded, chewing her lip, and he watched 5 years of a childhood that had already known too much pass across her small face. Then she brightened, because she was 8 and 8-year-olds don't stay in the dark long. "Do I get the window seat?" "You get the window seat." "Yes." She pumped her fist and ran to grab her backpack, the old blue one with the frayed strap that she refused to let him replace because Sarah had bought it. Daniel wrapped the sandwiches, zipped them into the side pocket, and told himself, the way he told himself every single morning, that he was doing okay. That he was a good father. That keeping this kid fed and safe and laughing was enough of a life for a man who had failed at the only thing he was ever truly good at. He almost believed it. The airport was the airport. Fluorescent light and bad coffee, and a security line that moved like cold syrup. Daniel kept one hand on Mia's shoulder the whole way through, steering her, and he noticed the way the TSA agent looked at him. The tired man, the little girl. No wife in sight, and drew whatever conclusion tired man, little girl conclusions get drawn. Daniel didn't care anymore. He used to care what strangers thought. That was another thing Sarah's death had burned out of him. "Dad, that guy's got a real gun," Mia whispered, pointing at an officer. "Don't point." "Sorry." She put her hand down. "But he does. He does. He's the good guy. Come on." They found their gate. Seattle to Chicago. A 4-hour flight. Economy seats. 31A and 31B, the very back near the lavatories, because those were the cheap seats, and Daniel Hayes had learned to be very, very good at finding the cheap version of everything. While they waited, Mia narrated the terminal to him, the way she narrated everything. That woman's suitcase had a broken wheel. That businessman had been on the phone for 11 minutes without breathing. That baby 3 seats down was about to lose its mind. Watch 3, 2, 1, and the baby lost its mind right on cue. And Mia looked up at her father with pure triumph. "How do you do that?" he asked her. "I just watch people," she said like it was obvious. "You do it too. You just don't say it out loud." He looked at his daughter for a long moment. She was right. He did do it. He watched everyone all the time cataloging skin color and breathing rate, and the way a person held their arm reading bodies, the way other people read the news. He'd trained himself out of it, or thought he had. But it never really left. It just went quiet waiting. "You're too smart for 8, he told her. "I'm almost 9. You're 8.5. That rounds up." He laughed an actual laugh, short and surprised, and it felt like something rusty turning over. She beamed at having caused it. That was the thing about Mia. She collected his laughs like they were rare coins because they were. They boarded in the last group, of course. Walking down the aisle toward the back, Daniel passed through first class, and that was when he saw the woman. I didn't know who she was. He would find out later, and finding out would change his whole life. But in that moment, she was just seat 2C, a silver-haired woman in an expensive gray suit, maybe 60, with the kind of posture that came from a lifetime of never once being told to wait. She was talking into a phone she wasn't supposed to have on yet, and she was talking hard. And even in the 2 seconds it took Daniel to pass her, he clocked 3 things automatically the way he used to clock things on a call. Her color was off. A little gray around the mouth. She had one hand pressed flat against her sternum while she talked, and she didn't seem to know she was doing it. And she was sweating in a cabin that was, if anything, too cold. Daniel's brain flagged it not right the way it always did, and then he did what he always did now. He shut the flag off, filed it. Kept walking. Not my job. Not anymore. Some rich woman was stressed about a phone call, that was all, and a stressed rich woman was the last thing on earth Daniel Hayes had signed up to worry about. He and Mia found 31A and 31B. She took the window. He took the middle, and a heavy-set man in a Seahawks cap took the aisle and immediately fell asleep before they'd even pushed back from the gate. Mia pressed her face to the window and watched the ground crew narrating. "That guy's mad. That guy's bored. That guy loves his job. Look how he's waving the sticks. Dad, look. I see him. He loves his job." He does. Daniel closed his eyes. He was so tired. Not sleepy tired. The other kind. The kind that lived in his bones and had for 5 years. He'd been up half the night on the phone with his sister about their father. About the bills, about the impossible math of a man who made airport maintenance money, trying to keep 2 households alive at once. He let the hum of the engines fill his head, and he told himself again that he was doing okay. The plane climbed. The seatbelt light went off. Somewhere up front, a woman in a gray suit finished her phone call and pressed her hand harder against her chest and did not tell a single soul that something was wrong. It happened 90 minutes in. Daniel was half asleep when he heard it, a sound, a wrong sound from the front of the plane. Not a scream. Screams came later. This was the first sound, and it was the one that his body reacted to before his mind even caught up. A hard, heavy thump, the specific sound of a full-grown adult hitting the floor without putting their hands out to stop it. His eyes were open before he decided to open them. Then the voices started. Ma'am. Oh my God. Is she? Somebody help her. A flight attendant's voice, high and cracking. Is there a doctor on board? We need a doctor. Is anyone on board? A medical professional. And then the silence. That specific, horrible silence. Daniel knew better than almost anyone alive. Alive, the silence of a plane full of people, all waiting for someone else to be the one who knew what to do. 160 people. Somebody had to be a doctor. Somebody had to. That was how it worked, wasn't it? On TV there was always a doctor. Nobody stood up. Daniel sat frozen in seat 31B, with his heart pounding and every cell in his body screamed at him at once. Two opposite screams, and he could hear both of them as clearly as if they'd been spoken out loud. Go. Go now. You know how. Get up. And under it, older, deeper, uglier. You'll fail. You'll get your hands on her and she'll die anyway, just like Sarah died, and you'll have to live with two of them instead of one. Stay in your seat. You're not that man anymore. You gave that up. Stay down. Stay down. Stay down. Dad? Mia had turned from the window. She was looking at him. Dad, that lady fell down. The flight attendant's voice again breaking now, real fear in it. Please, anybody. Dad. Mia's small hand landed on his arm. Dad, why isn't anybody helping her? And Daniel Hayes looked at his daughter. His daughter who watched people who couldn't understand why a whole plane full of grown-ups would sit and film a dying woman, and something in him that had been frozen for 5 years cracked straight down the middle. He was up before he made the decision. Stay here, he told Mia, and his voice came out in a register she'd never heard from him. Flat, fast, certain. Don't move from that seat, I mean it. He was already moving down the aisle, and he was shouting as he moved, and the words that came out of him were words he hadn't said in 5 years, and they came out perfectly the way they always used to, because it turned out that part of him had never actually died. It had just been holding its breath. I'm coming through EMT, let me through, move, move. People pressed back into their seats. He shoved past the drink cart, past a man filming with his phone held high, and he reached the front of the cabin, and there she was. The woman in the gray suit. Seat 2C. On the floor in the narrow galley space half on her side, and Daniel dropped to his knees beside her, and his hands were already working before his brain narrated a single thing. No pulse at the throat. He pressed 2 fingers to her carotid, and felt nothing, nothing, and his stomach dropped because he knew what nothing meant. Not breathing. He put his cheek an inch from her mouth. No air. Chest not rising. How long? He barked at the flight attendant, kneeling across from him, young, terrified 23 maybe. How long has she been down? I don't, a minute maybe. Okay, look at me. He locked eyes with the kid because he needed her steady. What's your name? Kayla. Kayla, you're going to help me, and you're going to be great, all right. I need you to get on that intercom and tell the pilot we have a cardiac arrest, an adult female, and we are starting CPR right now. We need the plane on the ground at the nearest field. Say those words. Cardiac arrest. Nearest field. Go. Kayla went. Later. Daniel would learn her name and thank her by it because she did every single thing he asked without freezing again, and that was the reason the woman lived. But in the moment, she was just a pair of hands he could aim. Daniel got the woman flat on her back. He tilted her chin, cleared her airway, and put the heel of his hand in the center of her chest, right on the sternum, right where 5 years ago he'd have found it in his sleep, and he laced his other hand over the top and locked his elbows, and he began. 1, 2, 3, 4. He pushed. Hard. 2 inches deep, the way you have to, the way that feels like too much to people who've never done it, the way that cracks cartilage, and sometimes ribs, and is the only thing that keeps a stopped heart pretending to beat. 5, 6, 7, 8. He heard something give under his hands, and he did not slow down because a cracked rib heals and a dead brain does not. And any medic who's afraid of the crack is a medic who lets people die. Stay awake. The words tore out of him. He didn't plan them. They came from somewhere below thought. Look at me. You are not dying on this plane today. You hear me? Not today. The whole cabin was watching. He could feel it, the phones, the eyes, the collective held breath of 160 strangers, and none of it touched him. He'd gone somewhere he hadn't been in 5 years, a place with no room in it for anything but the body under his hands and the count in his head. The world had narrowed to 2 hands and a sternum and a number. 28, 29, 30. He pinched her nose, sealed his mouth over hers, and gave 2 breaths, watching her chest rise, and then his hands were back on her sternum before the second breath had finished leaving her. Come on, he growled. come on, don't you do this. 1, 2, 3. Behind him a voice. A passenger. Is she breathing? Is it working? Give him room, someone else snapped. Everybody give the man room. 12, 13, 14. Dad. That voice cut through everything. Small. Scared. Close. Mia. She'd left her seat. She was standing 3 feet away in the aisle, both hands over her mouth, watching her father kneel over a stranger and pound on her chest. And for 1/2 of 1 second, Daniel's eyes flicked up and met his daughter's, and he saw the fear in them, and he understood exactly what she was seeing. She was seeing her mother, because this was how Sarah had died. Not exactly like this, but close enough that an 8-year-old could feel the shape of it. A person on the ground. Her father's hands on a chest. Her father's voice saying, "Stay awake, stay with me, come on." Mia had been 3 when Sarah died. She said she didn't remember it. Daniel had always hoped that was true. Looking at her face right now, he knew it wasn't. Mia, he said, not stopping the compressions, never stopping. Go sit with the nice lady Kayla. Right now. I've got this. Baby, I've got this. Go. Kayla appeared and gathered Mia up and pulled her back, and Mia went still watching over the flight attendant's shoulder, and Daniel put her out of his mind, because he had to, because the woman under his hands was more dead than alive, and getting deader every second he was distracted. 29:30. 2 breaths. Chest rise. Back to compressions. His arms were burning now. CPR is not like the movies. It is the hardest physical work most people will ever do, and doing it right at the right depth at the right rate, over 100 times a minute, will exhaust a strong man in 3 or 4 minutes. Daniel was not as young as he'd been. His shoulders screamed. His lower back was a sheet of fire. Sweat dripped off his nose onto the gray suit. He did not stop. "Somebody find me an AED," he shouted, still counting under his breath. "A defibrillator. Every commercial plane has one. Kayla, on this aircraft, there's a red bag. It says AED on it. Find it." Kayla and another attendant tore into the galley cabinets. Daniel kept pumping. His mind, running on a track parallel to the count, did the terrible math automatically. Time down, pushing 3 minutes now. Brain cells starving. Every minute without circulation, the odds fell. He knew the numbers. He'd lived inside the numbers for a decade. The numbers were bad and getting worse, and the only thing standing between this woman and the numbers was Daniel Hayes's 2 burning arms. "Got it." Kayla shoved the red bag at him. "This one. That's it. Open it. Rip her jacket open. I need her chest bare. Don't be gentle. RIP it." He didn't stop compressions while he talked her through it. He'd trained rooms full of people to do exactly this. His voice found the old rhythm, the teaching rhythm, calm on the surface with an engine of urgency underneath. Peel the backing off the pads. See the picture on them. One goes upper right below the collarbone. One goes lower left on the ribs under the yes. Yes, exactly there. Press them down hard. Get good contact. The AED's robotic voice woke up. Analyzing heart rhythm. Do not touch the patient. Everybody off her. Daniel threw his hands up and back off her body for the first time since he'd started. Nobody touch her. Let it read. The cabin went dead silent. 160 people held one breath. The machine hummed. Shock advised. Charging. Thank God. Daniel breathed. Shockable rhythm. That meant her heart wasn't flatlined. It was quivering, useless, but electrical. That meant there was something to shock back into line. That meant a chance. Stand clear. Deliver shock now. Press the flashing button. Clear. Daniel roared one last look to make sure not a single soul was touching her, and he jammed his thumb down on the button. The woman's body jolted. And then nothing. The cabin waited. Daniel's fingers were already back at her throat. Nothing. No pulse, he said, and got back on her chest without a heartbeat of hesitation. 2 more minutes, then it reads again. Come on, lady, come on. He'd stopped shouting, stay awake now. She couldn't hear him, and he knew it. But he kept talking anyway, low, just for himself, the way he used to talk to patients in the back of a rig at 3 in the morning, when it was just him and them and the dark. You've got people, he muttered, pushing. I don't know who, but somebody's waiting for you somewhere. Somebody always is. So you're gonna come back, okay? You're gonna come back for them. 1, 2, 3, 4. He thought about Sarah. He couldn't help it. His body was doing the exact thing he'd done for his wife on the worst night of his life, and his hands remembered, and his hands dragged the memory up whether he wanted it or not. He'd done everything right for Sarah. That was the part nobody understood. That was the part he could never explain. He'd been perfect. Textbook. Fast, deep, correct for 22 minutes on their bedroom floor, while the ambulance he used to drive raced toward his own house. And Sarah had died anyway. Died under the same hands that had saved dozens of strangers. And Daniel had decided, kneeling on that bedroom floor with his wife's body under his perfect, useless hands, that a man whose skill couldn't save the one person who mattered had no right to the skill at all. He'd walked away from all of it. The certification, the job, the man. He'd become 31B. Maintenance. Keeps the lights on. 28, 29, 30. 2 breaths. Analyzing heart rhythm. Off her clear. Everyone off. The machine hummed. Daniel's hands hovered an inch above the woman's chest, shaking now from exhaustion and from something else. Shock advised. Charging. Shockable again. Still electrical. Still fighting. Stand clear. Deliver shock. Clear. He hit the button. The body jolted. And this time Daniel's fingers flew to her throat and he felt it. Under his 2 fingers. Faint. Thready. Irregular as a drunk drummer. But there. A pulse. "I've got a pulse," he said, and his voice cracked in half on the last word. 5 years of ice breaking all at once. "I've got a pulse. She's back, Kayla. She's back." The woman's chest heaved. She dragged in a breath on her own, a huge, ragged, whooping breath, the most beautiful sound in the world, and coughed, and her eyelids fluttered, and a low sound came out of her, and she was breathing. She was breathing, her color already changing under Daniel's eyes from gray toward something almost human. And the cabin exploded. He hadn't heard them the whole time, he'd blocked them out completely, but now the sound crashed back in all at once. 160 people crying and cheering and clapping, a woman 2 rows back, openly sobbing, the man who'd been filming, lowering his phone with tears running into his beard, strangers grabbing strangers' shoulders. Somewhere a voice kept saying, oh my God, he did it, he did it." Daniel didn't hear most of it. He was down close to the woman's face, one hand cradling the back of her head, keeping her airway open, keeping her on her side, now in case she vomited, talking to her low and steady. Hey there you are. Don't try to talk. You're okay. You had a cardiac event, and your heart stopped. But it's beating now, you understand me. You're okay. We're getting the plane down. You're gonna be okay." Her eyes found his. Unfocused, terrified, swimming up from somewhere very deep. Her lips moved. No sound came out at first. Then barely a whisper cracked and raw. "Who?" "Don't talk. Just breathe." Her hand came up, slow, trembling, and closed weakly around his wrist. She held on like a person going over the side of a boat. "Who are you?" Daniel looked down at this woman he had just pulled back across a line. Almost nobody comes back across this silver-haired stranger in a ruined gray suit, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt like himself. Not okay. Not fine. Himself. The man he'd buried on a bedroom floor. Standing up inside his own body again like he'd never left. He didn't answer her question. Instead, he said gently, "I'm right here. That's all that matters. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere until they take you off this plane." "Okay." She held his wrist, and she breathed, and she cried silently. Tears running sideways across her face and into her silver hair, and she didn't let go. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, tight and formal, telling the cabin they were making an emergency descent into the nearest airport, that medical personnel would meet them at the gate, that everyone should return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. Kayla knelt beside Daniel, the whole descent, holding a blanket over the woman, watching Daniel's face for instructions. "Keep her on her side," Daniel told her. "Watch her breathing. If she stops, you yell for me. I'll be right here on the floor. If she vomits, turn her head so it clears. You did great. You hear me? You did everything right. You saved her life as much as I did." Kayla was crying too. I didn't do anything. You didn't freeze, Daniel said. When it counted, you didn't freeze. Most people freeze. You want to know the truth. 160 people on this plane froze. You didn't. Remember that. He should have taken his own words to heart. He'd frozen too back in seat 31B for those first endless seconds. He'd sat there with a dying woman 30 feet away and let the old fear pin him to the chair. And if it hadn't been for a small hand on his arm and a small voice asking, "Why isn't anybody helping her?" He wasn't sure he'd have gotten up at all. That was a thing he was going to have to live with. That he'd almost let her die. That the man he used to be had almost stayed dead. But the man he used to be hadn't stayed dead. That was the other thing. And now that he was awake, Daniel didn't know how he was ever supposed to put him back to sleep. The plane dropped fast. Ears popped. Somewhere behind him, a baby was screaming, the same baby from the terminal. He thought distantly and almost laughed. The woman held his wrist the entire way down. Every so often her grip weakened, and Daniel would say her heartbeat's name, would press 2 fingers to her throat and count and reassure himself and her both still there, still beating. "You're doing so good," he told her. "Almost down, almost down." They landed hard and fast and taxied straight to a gate, where through the little galley window, Daniel could see the red and white lights already flashing. His own kind. Paramedics with a gurney running toward the jet bridge before the plane had even fully stopped. He felt something twist in his chest at the sight of them. Grief and longing all tangled up together. That used to be him running toward the plane. That used to be his lights. The door opened. The medics came aboard fast and professional, and Daniel did the thing he used to do on the other end of it. He gave the handoff. Clean fast, complete the whole story in 15 seconds, so nobody had to guess. Adult female, approximately 60, witnessed cardiac arrest down maybe 90 seconds before I got to her. CPR immediately, high quality, minimal interruptions. AED on scene, 2 shocks. Return of spontaneous circulation after the second shock that was maybe 4 minutes ago. She's been breathing on her own since GCS is coming up. She's tracking. She squeezed my hand and spoke. No known history. I got nothing on meds or allergies. Pulse was thready, but it's strengthening. That's everything I've got. The lead medic. A woman about Daniel's age stared at him for a second, taking in this rumpled man in economy class clothes who'd just handed her a perfect medical report. "You a medic?" she asked. "I was," Daniel said. "A long time ago." "Well." She was already moving, already getting the woman onto the board. "You just did the cleanest layperson save I've seen in 20 years. What's your name for the report? And the family's gonna want to know." And there it was. The question again. "Who are you? What's your name?" Daniel opened his mouth. And then he heard behind him, small and shaky, his daughter's voice. "Daddy!" He turned. Mia was standing in the aisle, still clutched in Kayla's arm, her face wet, her whole small body trembling, staring at her father like she wasn't completely sure he was still hers. Like he'd become somebody else in the last 10 minutes, and she needed to check. And in that instant, every other thing in the world stopped mattering. Not the woman, not the medics, not the question about his name, not the 160 people who were even now beginning to press forward, wanting to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him he was a hero, to ask him who he was and where he'd come from and how he'd known what to do. Not the phones, dozens of them now all pointed at him, recording, capturing his face, his exhausted, unguarded, wide-open face. Just Mia. Just his kid, scared, needing him. Needing her father. Not a hero. Her father. Daniel didn't answer the medic. He stepped over the AED bag and crossed to his daughter and dropped to his knees in front of her and pulled her hard against his chest. And she grabbed 2 fistfuls of his shirt and started to really cry now, the way she hadn't let herself in front of everyone. And he held the back of her head the same way he'd held the back of a stranger's head 5 minutes ago. "I'm here," he whispered into her hair. "I'm right here. I've got you. It's Dad. It's just Dad. I'm okay. She's okay. Everybody's okay. I've got you." You were doing the thing," Mia sobbed. "The thing you did to Mommy." And there it was, out loud. The thing she'd said she didn't remember. Daniel's eyes squeezed shut. "I know, baby. I know. I know it looked like that. Is that lady gonna? That lady is going to be okay, Daniel said, and he pulled back just enough to look his daughter in the eyes so she'd believe him. You hear me? She's going to be okay. Because I helped her in time. It's not like it's not the same. She's going to be okay. And I need you to be brave for about 30 more seconds so we can get off this plane. All right? Can you be brave for 30 seconds? Mia nodded, hiccuping, and wiped her face with the back of her hand. Good girl. That's my girl. Around them, the plane had become chaos of a happier kind. People wanted him. He could feel it building the way a crowd builds when it decides someone is a hero. A man was calling out, "Sir, sir, God bless you." A woman was trying to press her business card into his hand. Someone else was saying his footage was already going to be everywhere. Did he know? Did he understand what he'd just done? Everyone had seen it. The medics were shouting for a path so they could wheel the woman out. And through all of it, Daniel Hayes had exactly one thought, clear and cold, and absolutely certain, the same instinct that had run his whole life since a bedroom floor 5 years ago. Get her out of here. Get your kid out of here. Now. I didn't want the hands on his shoulders. He didn't want the cards or the blessings or the phones. He didn't want to answer, "Who are you?" because the honest answer was a wound he'd spent 5 years learning not to touch, and every stranger reaching for him was reaching straight into it. He didn't want to be a hero. Heroes get thanked. Heroes get remembered. Heroes have their faces studied and their names learned, and Daniel Hayes had spent 5 years making sure nobody studied his face or learned that his real name went with a real story about a real dead wife he couldn't save. So he did what he always did. He got small. He got invisible. He got gone. He hauled the frayed blue backpack up off the floor of the plane where Mia had dropped it. He got one arm around his daughter and one hand on the strap, and he put his head down, and he moved not toward the crowd wanting to touch him, but with it letting the surge of exiting passengers swallow him. Just another tired dad and his kid shuffling off a plane. Nobody. No one maintenance keeps the lights on. Sir, the lead medic's voice calling after him through the crush. Sir, wait your name the family. Daniel didn't turn around. Behind him on a gurney. Silver hair spilling off the edge. An oxygen mask, fogging with each breath, a woman he did not know was named. Victoria Sterling turned her head, searching her eyes moving over the crowd, looking for the wrist she'd held all the way down, looking for the man who'd told her, "I'm not going anywhere until they take you off this plane," and finding only the back of his head, already disappearing into the jet bridge, already gone. Wait, she tried to say through the mask. It came out as nothing. Wait, the man, where's the man? But the man was already in the terminal. The man was already kneeling down in a quiet corner near the windows, away from everyone, zipping his daughter's coat, thumbing the tears off her face, telling her they still had to figure out how to get to Chicago, because Grandpa was waiting, and Grandpa didn't have much time. The man was already back to being a father with an impossible day ahead of him, and a sick dad 3 states away, and not nearly enough money to fix any of it. Dad, Mia said as he retied her shoe. Her voice was steadier now. She'd found her feet the way she always did. Dad, that was you, the old you, wasn't it, from before? Daniel paused with her shoelace in his hands. Around them, the airport went on being an airport. Somewhere back at the gate, a crowd was still buzzing about the miracle they'd witnessed, and a video was already climbing, and a billionaire was being wheeled toward an ambulance, asking anyone who'd listen about a man with no name. And here in a quiet corner by the windows, an 8-year-old girl looked up at her father and asked him in the plainest possible way the question the whole world was about to spend weeks trying to answer. Daniel looked at his daughter for a long time. Yeah, he finally said very quietly. Yeah, that was me, from before. I liked him, Mia said. And Daniel Hayes, who had walked away from 160 grateful strangers, who had left a saved life behind without a name, who had spent 5 years absolutely certain that the man he used to be deserved to stay buried, felt those 3 small words land somewhere in the very center of him that he'd sealed off a long time ago. I liked him. He finished tying her shoe. He stood up. He shouldered the old blue backpack, and he took his daughter's hand, and he did not yet know that this ordinary, invisible, terrible day was the day his old life had come looking for him. He did not know that a woman named Victoria Sterling would not, could not, would never let this go. He only knew that his father was waiting and his daughter needed him, and that somewhere over the last 20 minutes, at 35,000 feet a door he'd nailed shut 5 years ago had come off its hinges, and he had absolutely no idea how he was ever going to close it again. "Come on," he said, his voice rough. "Let's go find Grandpa." And the two of them walked off together into the noise of the terminal, a single father and his 8-year-old daughter holding hands, invisible again, exactly the way Daniel wanted it. While behind them, the whole world was already beginning to ask his name. The video was already at 4 million views before Victoria Sterling's ambulance reached the hospital. She didn't know that yet. She didn't know anything yet except that she was cold, and that there was a plastic mask fogging over her mouth, and that the ceiling of the vehicle was moving too fast, and that somewhere in the last hour, a stranger's hands had reached inside her chest and dragged her back from a place she couldn't quite remember but couldn't quite forget either. A dark place. A quiet one. She'd been so close to just staying. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." She squeezed. The medic, a young man with a beard, smiled at her like she'd done something remarkable. "There she is. You're doing great, Ms. Sterling. We're 2 minutes out. You just keep breathing for me." They knew her name. Of course they knew her name. Everyone always knew her name. She was Victoria Sterling. She ran Meridian Health, $40 billion in market cap. 140,000 employees. A name that made hospital administrators sit up straight and senators return her calls within the hour. Everyone on Earth knew who Victoria Sterling was. And the one man she actually wanted to know, the only person in that whole screaming cabin whose name she'd have traded her entire fortune for, was the one man she hadn't gotten. The man, she managed, pushing the words out under the mask. Her voice was gravel. "On the plane. The man who—" "Try not to talk, ma'am. The man who saved me." She got a hand up weakly and gripped the medic's sleeve. "Where is he? I need find him." "I don't know, ma'am. I wasn't on the plane. But you can ask when we get you settled. Okay, right now I need you to rest." Victoria let her hand fall. She stared at the moving ceiling. And in the fog of a brain that had been without oxygen for 4 minutes and was only now rebooting, one image had somehow survived intact. Clearer than her own name, clearer than anything. A tired face close to hers, sweat dripping off it, eyes that were exhausted and terrified and absolutely unwilling to let her go. And a voice. "You've got people. Somebody's waiting for you somewhere. So you're gonna come back." She'd held on to his wrist all the way down. She remembered that. The one thing she'd held on to in the whole falling world was the wrist of a man whose name she didn't know. And he'd left. Nobody left Victoria Sterling. People spent years, careers, fortunes, trying to get 30 seconds of her attention. And this man had held her life in his 2 hands and then simply walked away from her the second she was breathing, like she was nobody. Like saving her had been the only point, and now that it was done, there was nothing more he wanted. It short-circuited something in her that decades of business had wired shut. "Find him," she said again to no one, to the ceiling. "I'm going to find him." The first 48 hours in the hospital were a war she fought flat on her back. She woke up in a private suite on the top floor. Meridian owned a stake in the hospital, and administration had cleared out an entire wing before her gurney even arrived, surrounded by the machinery of her own life, reassembling itself around her. Her chief of staff, Marcus, was already there when her eyes opened, tablet in hand, face gray. Her personal physician had flown in. 2 board members were on a screen propped at the foot of her bed talking about messaging and the market open and getting ahead of the narrative, because a public company's CEO collapsing on a commercial flight was to them primarily a stock problem. "The important thing," one of them was saying, "is that we control the story. We put out a statement brief reassuring Victoria is recovering, blah blah, back to full strength within." "I want the man's name," Victoria said. The room stopped. "I'm sorry." Marcus leaned in. "Victoria, you should rest. The doctors said. The man on the plane." Her voice was still raw, but there was iron coming back into it fast. The iron everyone in that room knew and feared. The one who did CPR. The one on the video everyone is apparently watching. Get me his name and get me a way to reach him. Today. Marcus and the physician exchanged a look. It was the physician who spoke gently. Victoria, you had a sudden cardiac arrest at altitude. You were clinically dead for several minutes. You are extraordinarily lucky to be not just alive, but neurologically intact. Right now, your job, your only job, is to lie there and let your heart rest. The man can wait. The man, Victoria said slowly, is the reason there's a heart to rest. So no, the man cannot wait. She turned her head to Marcus. You have a security division that costs me $11 million a year. You have investigators who found a leaking board member in a weekend. There is video of this man's face being watched by how many now? Marcus glanced at his tablet. His jaw tightened. As of an hour ago, a little over 9 million views. It's climbing fast. They're calling him what? Marcus hesitated. The vanishing hero, because he left. Nobody got his name. There's a whole thing online about it. People are trying to identify him. So far, nobody has. Something moved across Victoria's face that none of them recognized because they'd never seen it there before. It looked almost like fear. 9 million people are looking for this man, she said quietly, and not one of them can find him. He didn't want to be found, Victoria. That seems fairly clear. I don't care what he wanted. She said it flat and cold, and even as it left her mouth, some small, clean part of her heard how it sounded. I don't care what he wanted, and flinched. That was exactly the sentence that had built her empire. I don't care what he wanted. She'd said versions of it in 1,000 meetings. It had never once made her feel the way it made her feel now, lying in a bed alive because of a man who had wanted nothing. She closed her eyes. Find him, she said softer. Please, I need to say thank you. Is that so strange? A man saves my life and I don't even know his name. I can't live with that. Find him. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll put someone on it. Put your best person on it. I'll put Reyes on it. Good. Victoria let her head sink back into the pillow. Across the room, the board members were still talking about the stock. She didn't hear a word of it. She was 35,000 feet up again, going over the side of a boat, and the only thing between her and the dark was a stranger's wrist and a stranger's voice telling her she had people waiting. Did she, though? That was the thought that snuck in when the drugs made her honest. Did she have people waiting? She had a chief of staff. She had a board. She had an ex-husband who'd stopped calling years ago, and a daughter in London who she spoke to twice a year, and a company of 140,000 people who would grieve her for exactly one news cycle and then check the stock price. The man on the plane had said somebody's waiting for you. He'd said it with total certainty, like it was just obviously true of everyone. Victoria Sterling lay in a hospital bed worth more than most people's houses, 61 years old, freshly returned from the dead, and realized she wasn't actually sure it was true of her at all. That more than the cardiac arrest was the thing that scared her. Reyes was good. That was why Victoria paid her what she paid her. Ana Reyes had spent 11 years in federal law enforcement before Meridian tripled her salary to run corporate security, and she approached the problem of the vanishing hero the way she approached everything methodically and without any of the sentiment that was clogging up her boss. The passenger manifest was the obvious start, and it was also a dead end faster than she expected. The flight had been full 161 souls, and while she could pull the list, the video showed a man traveling with a young girl and cross-referencing adult males traveling with a minor still left her with a dozen candidates, none of whom she could confirm without more. But Reyes didn't need the manifest for long. She had the video. She watched it 40 times. She watched it with the sound off and the sound on. She watched the man's hands, and the first thing she wrote in her notes was, "This is not a layperson." The economy of his movement, the way he'd cleared the airway, the way he'd talked the flight attendant through the AED without ever breaking his compression rhythm. The handoff to the paramedics that a passenger's phone had caught the tail end of, she'd played that part 100 times, the man reciting a clean clinical report in 15 seconds flat. Adult female, approximately 60, witnessed cardiac arrest. That's a medic, Reyes said out loud alone in her office at 11 at night. That's a medic who's been doing it for years. So she stopped looking for a passenger and started looking for a paramedic. A former one because the man on the plane was flying economy in wrinkled clothes with a kid, and something about him read as out of the life rather than in it. She pulled EMS certification databases across Washington state since the flight had originated in Seattle. She filtered for men in the right age range whose certifications had lapsed in the last several years. It was still a long list. Then she went back to the video one more time, and she caught the thing she'd missed. Right at the end, in the chaos. When the man crossed to the little girl and knelt down. The girl said something sobbing, and a nearby passenger's phone caught it muffled. But there, if you turned it all the way up, you were doing the thing you did to mommy. Reyes sat back in her chair. The thing you did to mommy. She was a professional. She didn't let herself feel things on the job. Feelings clouded the work. But she sat with that one for a moment because it told her almost everything. The mother was gone. The man had tried to save her the same way with his hands, and it hadn't worked. And he'd walked away from a plane full of people calling him a hero. Because a plane full of people calling him a hero was the last thing on earth a man like that could stand. Oh, Reyes said softly. Oh, you poor guy. Then she went back to her list of lapsed paramedics and she started looking specifically for one who had lost a wife. It took her a day and a half. A newspaper archive did most of the work, a local Seattle area paper 5 years back. A short piece about a paramedic who'd lost his wife to a sudden cardiac event in their home, despite performing CPR himself until the ambulance arrived. There was a name. There was a photo grainy from happier times at some department award ceremony. Reyes put the award ceremony photo side by side with a freeze frame from the airplane video. Same man. Older, thinner, grayer, more broken. But the same man. Daniel Hayes, 38. Formerly one of the most decorated EMTs in his district. Currently, a little more digging employed in maintenance at SeaTac Airport, which was how he'd have gotten the flight cheap. Widower. One daughter, age 8. Reyes had a home address within the hour. She sat looking at it for a while before she called her boss. Something about the whole thing sat wrong with her, not wrong, like illegal wrong, like cruel. This was a man who had very deliberately hidden. Who had performed the single bravest, most generous act she'd witnessed in years and then made himself invisible on purpose, because being seen cost him something the rest of them couldn't understand. And she was about to hand his hiding place to a billionaire who was used to getting whatever she wanted. She almost didn't make the call. But it was her job, and 11-year federal careers don't leave much room for almost, so she called. I have him, Reyes said. On the other end, in a hospital bed, Victoria Sterling's breath caught. Who is he? His name is Daniel Hayes. Reyes read from her notes, flat professional. 38, widower, 1 daughter. Former paramedic, a highly decorated one actually for about a decade. He left the field 5 years ago after his wife died of a cardiac arrest at home. He performed CPR on her himself. It didn't work. He hasn't worked in medicine since. He does maintenance at the Seattle airport now. That's how he was on your flight employee travel. The line was silent for a long moment. Say that again, Victoria said finally. The part about his wife. His wife died of the same thing that almost killed you, ma'am. Cardiac arrest. He did CPR on her with his own hands and she died anyway. And then he did CPR on you with the same hands and you lived. Victoria Sterling pressed her free hand over her mouth. In 30 years of ruthless, clear-eyed deal-making, she had never once in her life felt what she felt in that moment, and she did not have a name for it. Where is he now? She whispered. His father's been hospitalized in Illinois. That's where he was flying to see him. That's why he didn't stick around. He wasn't running from you, ma'am. He was running toward a dying father. Reyes paused. I want to say something if that's all right. Say it. This man went out of his way to not be found. He turned down every camera on that plane. He didn't want a reward, didn't want his name in the news, didn't want any of it. Whatever you're planning to do with this information, I'd think hard about what he actually needs versus what would make you feel better. That's all. That's my whole opinion. I'll send the file." She hung up. Victoria lay in the dark of her hospital suite, the file arriving on her tablet with a soft chime. A photograph of a smiling younger man at some award ceremony glowing up at her, and she cried for the first time in longer than she could remember. Not delicately. Not the single dignified tear appropriate to a CEO. She cried like the 61-year-old woman she actually was, alone in a bed, saved by a man who had lost his wife to the exact thing that had tried to kill her. A man who had knelt over her body and thought of his dead wife the whole time and refused to let her go anyway. "You've got people. Somebody's waiting for you." He'd told her that while dragging his own worst memory up by the roots to save a stranger. "Oh my God," Victoria whispered into the dark. "Who are you?" While Victoria Sterling wept in a penthouse hospital suite over a file about his life, Daniel Hayes was sitting in a plastic chair in a very different kind of hospital, 300 miles away, holding what was left of his father's hand. The old man was smaller than Daniel remembered. That was the cruelty of it, every time smaller. Frank Hayes had been a big man once, a union electrician with forearms like cables and a laugh you could hear across a job site. The thing in the bed had his father's face laid over somebody much frailer, and it broke Daniel a little more each time he walked into the room. "You look like hell," Frank said. His voice was a thread, but the eyes were still his, still sharp, still his father's. "Thanks, Dad. You look great." "Liar." Frank's mouth twitched. "Where's my granddaughter?" "Cafeteria. Your nurse Rosa, she took Mia down for pudding. Mia has decided Rosa is her best friend. Rosa didn't get a vote." The old man's chest moved with something that might have been a laugh. "Good kid. Best kid." They sat in the quiet a while. The machines did their machine things. Down the hall, somebody's television murmured. Daniel watched his father breathe and did the math he'd promised himself he'd stop doing, reading the room, the way he read every room, and the numbers told him what the doctors had already told him in gentler words. Not long now. Weeks. Maybe less. "I saw something," Frank said out of nowhere. "Yeah. On Rosa's little phone. She showed me. Some fella on an airplane saving a lady's life." Frank turned his head slow on the pillow and fixed his son with those sharp, dying eyes. "Fella looked a whole lot like you, Danny." Daniel went very still. "That was you," Frank said. It wasn't a question. "Dad. Don't dad me. I changed your diapers. That was you. On that plane. Rosa's phone said nobody knows who the fella is. Called him a, what was it, a vanishing hero." The old man's eyes glittered. "My boy, a vanishing hero." Daniel looked down at his father's hand in his. He didn't know what to say. He'd told nobody. Not his sister, not a soul. He'd gotten himself and Mia to Chicago on a rebooked flight, told Mia they weren't going to talk about the plane thing to anybody, and buried it the way he buried everything. "How's it feel?" Frank asked. "How's what feel?" "Being him again." Frank's grip tightened, weak but insistent. "Being the fella who runs toward it. 'Stead of the fella who spent 5 years running the other way." Daniel's jaw worked. "That's not... It's exactly what it is, and you know it's exactly what it is. So don't sit in my dying room and lie to me. I don't have the time for it." Frank had to stop, breathe, gather himself. The effort of the speech had cost him, but he wasn't done. "After Sarah, you put that man in a box, nailed it shut. I watched you do it. Watched my son, best damn medic that whole city ever had, decide he was gonna go fix light fixtures for the rest of his life to punish himself for something that was never his fault to begin with. It was my fault." The words came out of Daniel flat and immediate, 5 years worn smooth, a thing he'd said to himself 10,000 times. "I was right there. I did everything right and she died anyway. If I couldn't save her, my own wife, right there in my own house, then I've got no business." "Says who?" Frank's voice cracked like a whip, or tried to. "Says who, Danny? God, you think God sat you down and told you that? No. You told you that. You handed yourself a life sentence for a crime that doesn't exist. Sarah had a heart thing. Nobody caught. Not you. Not the doctors. Nobody. And it took her. And that's the whole ugly truth of it. And no amount of you throwing your own life in the garbage was ever going to change it or bring her back. Daniel didn't answer. His eyes were burning. And then, Frank went on, gentler now, running out of steam, and then some poor woman drops dead on your airplane, and I'll bet you anything you sat right there in your seat and told yourself to stay put. Didn't you? Told yourself you weren't that man anymore. Daniel's silence was an answer. But you got up. Frank smiled faint and prouder than Daniel had seen him look in years. In the end, you got up. Why? Daniel was quiet a long moment. Mia, he finally said. Mia put her hand on my arm. She asked me why nobody was helping the lady. He shook his head. I couldn't sit there and let my kid watch a whole plane of grown-ups do nothing. I couldn't teach her that you just film it, that you just let people die because getting involved might hurt. There it is, Frank whispered. There's my boy. That's the whole thing right there, Danny. You didn't get up for the lady. You got up for Mia. But you know what? Doesn't matter why the door opened. Door's open now. His eyes were sliding closed. The conversation had drained him. Door's open now, son. Question is whether you're man enough to walk through it, or whether you're gonna go find another box and nail yourself back inside. Dad, I'm tired, Danny. Frank's hand went slack in his. I'm gonna sleep a minute. You stay. And you think about what I said. Because I'm not gonna be around much longer to say it, and somebody's got to, and there's nobody left but me. He slept. Daniel sat there holding his father's hand, and he did not think about what Frank had said, because thinking about what Frank had said meant looking directly at the thing he'd spent 5 years not looking at, and he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready. He watched his father breathe, and he counted the breaths without meaning to, and he told himself the way he told himself every single day that he was doing okay. That fixing light fixtures was a fine life. That the man on the plane had been a fluke, a reflex, a door that had blown open in a storm, and that he'd have shut again by morning. He almost believed it. Then Mia came back from the cafeteria with pudding on her shirt, and her new best friend Rosa in tow, and Daniel put his face back together and became a father again, and pushed all of it down where he pushed everything. He had no idea that 300 miles away, a woman he'd saved was already on the phone with her chief of staff, saying the words that were going to blow his careful, buried, invisible life wide open. I'm going to Seattle, Victoria said. Marcus nearly dropped his tablet. You are absolutely not going to Seattle. Victoria, you were dead 4 days ago. Your cardiologist will resign on the spot. The board will... I don't work for the board. The board works for me. Charter the plane. You cannot fly. Your heart. Then charter a car and a driver, and I'll be horizontal in the back the whole way. I don't care, but I am going to find this man, and I am going to thank him to his face. She was already sitting up, already pulling at the leads on her chest, and Marcus rushed to stop her before she set off every alarm in the wing. Okay, stop, you'll hurt yourself. Just stop. He got her settled, breathing hard, both of them. Victoria, listen to me. Reyes is right, and you know she's right. This man hid. On purpose. From 9 million people. If you go crashing into his life with your jet and your security detail and your gratitude, you are going to do to him exactly the thing he ran away to avoid. You'll make him a spectacle. Is that the thank you want to give the guy to turn his worst day into a press event? Victoria stopped. That landed. Because it was true, and because underneath the imperious billionaire who'd said, I don't care what he wanted, there was still a person who had spent 4 days thinking about a man who'd wanted nothing, and that person did not want to hurt him. Then what do I do? She said quietly. I can't just do nothing. I can't just send a check. He'd hate a check. A man like that hates a check. So don't send a check. Then what? Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, which he had never once done in 6 years of working for her. Maybe, he said carefully, you find out what he actually needs. Not what you'd want. What he needs. His father's dying, Victoria. He's a single dad drowning in medical bills on a maintenance salary. Reyes's file, did you read the whole thing? I read it. Then you saw. He's underwater. 2 hospital situations at once, his and his dad's. He's the kind of proud that won't take charity, but he's the kind of desperate that's about to lose everything anyway. Those two things are about to collide and crush him. Marcus paused. There might be a way to help a man like that. But it's not a check, and it's not a jet, and it's not you sweeping in like a fairy godmother. It's smaller than that. It's smarter than that. And it has to let him keep his dignity, or he won't take it, and honestly, he shouldn't. Victoria looked at her chief of staff for a long moment. In 6 years, she'd thought of Marcus as competent. She'd never once thought of him as wise. She was recalibrating. "When did you get so smart?" she said. "I've always been this smart. You've been too busy being right to notice." He almost smiled. Reyes said something else. She said he was decorated. A decade of it. Said he might have been the best medic that whole city ever had before he quit. "Victoria, you run a health company. You spend billions on technology and machines and apps. When was the last time you spent any of it on a person, on an actual single specific person?" Victoria didn't answer because the honest answer was never, and she was too newly alive to lie. "Think about it," Marcus said, standing, straightening his jacket. "There's a version of this where you don't just thank him, where you give him back the thing he lost, not money, the thing, the other thing." He headed for the door then stopped. "But you can't do any of it if he won't be in a room with you. And right now, the only way you get in a room with a man like Daniel Hayes is if life backs him so far into a corner that he's got nowhere left to run. And I hate to say it, but—" Marcus glanced at his tablet at Reyes's file glowing there at the 2 hospital bills, and the sick father, and the 8-year-old, and the maintenance salary, all sitting in a column like a slow-motion car crash. "I don't think that corner is very far off." He left. Victoria Sterling sat alone in her bed, the heart monitor beeping steady and strong beside her. A heart that beat only because a broken man had refused to let it stop, and she thought about corners and dignity, and a video that 9 million people were watching of a stranger saving her life, and a file about a father dying 3 states away, and a little girl with pudding on her shirt who'd said the thing you did to mommy, and she made a decision. She wasn't going to send a check. She was going to wait. She was going to have Reyes keep a very quiet, very respectful eye on Daniel Hayes. And she was going to be ready. Cash-ready resources, ready everything, ready for the exact moment the world backed this good man into the corner Marcus had described. And when it did, when he had nowhere left to run, and no pride left to protect, and nothing left to lose, she was going to be standing there. Not with charity. With the one thing he might actually be unable to refuse. A way back. "Reyes," she said into the phone. "Change of plan. I'm not going to Seattle. Not yet." She looked out the window at a city that had no idea Victoria Sterling had been dead 4 days ago and had come back a different woman. "But I want you to stay on him, discreetly. I don't want to interfere. I don't want to be seen. I just want to know. If anything changes, if that father passes, if those bills come due, if that man hits the wall, I want to know the same hour it happens." Her voice softened almost to herself. "Because when he falls, Reyes, I want to be the one standing there to catch him, whether he likes it or not. And 300 miles away, in a hard plastic chair, holding his father's slack and dying hand." Daniel Hayes had no idea that the wall was already rushing up to meet him, or that the woman he'd left behind on a plane was at that very moment quietly assembling everything she had and waiting patient as a hawk for the day his whole invisible world finally came crashing down. The wall came for Daniel Hayes on a Tuesday, and it came the way walls always come all at once from 3 directions when a man is already too tired to brace. It started with the phone call at 6:14 in the morning. Rosa's number, the nurse from his father's ward in Illinois, and Daniel knew before he answered. The way you always know some animal part of you, knowing before the human part can catch up. I was back in Seattle by then. He'd had to come back. He'd used up every hour of leave he had, and a maintenance job doesn't hold itself for a man whose father is dying 3 states away. He'd flown back 4 days ago, kissed his father's forehead, promised he'd return the second the ward called, and gone home to keep the lights on so he could afford to bury him. "Mr. Hayes," Rosa said, and her voice was doing the thing nurses' voices do, the gentle thing, the terrible gentle thing. "I'm so sorry. It was very peaceful. He went in his sleep about an hour ago. He wasn't in any pain." Daniel stood in his kitchen in the gray-dark phone against his ear and did not say anything for a long time. "Mr. Hayes, are you there?" "I'm here," he said. His voice came out even, flat. The medic voice. The voice you use when the thing is too big to feel, yet so you just process it, just take the report. "Thank you, Rosa, for calling. For being good to him. He liked you. He told me. He said you were his favorite." Rosa was crying a little. "He was a wonderful man. He talked about you and Mia the whole time. He was so proud of you." "Yeah," Daniel said. "Yeah, okay. I'll make some calls. About getting him. About arrangements. Thank you, Rosa." He hung up. He set the phone down on the counter very carefully, like it might break. And he stood there in the dark kitchen where 5 years ago he'd spread peanut butter on white bread and lied to a TSA agent with his eyes, and he waited to feel it. It didn't come. Not yet. What came instead was the math. Because Daniel Hayes was a poor man whose father had just died 3 states away, and grief is a luxury, and his father's body was in Illinois. Getting a body from Illinois to anywhere costs money. A funeral costs money. His father had a little life insurance. A little, but there were his father's own medical bills, the ones that had been piling up all these months, and those didn't die when the man did. They came looking for next of kin. They came looking for Daniel. And Daniel already had his own mountain. He'd never told anyone the whole shape of it. Not his sister, not Mia, not a soul. But he knew it down to the dollar, because he lay awake with it every night. The old debt from Sarah, 5 years of it. The ambulance ride that had raced toward his own house too late. The ER, the things insurance hadn't covered, the funeral he'd paid for on a payment plan he was somehow still paying. And on top of that, the ordinary drowning of a single father on a maintenance salary. Mia's school things. The car that was one bad morning from dying. Rent that went up every year while his pay didn't. He'd been treading water for 5 years. And now his father had died and thrown an anchor around his neck, and Daniel stood in his kitchen and did the math and understood with the same flat clarity he used to bring to a dying patient that he was going to go under. Not maybe. Not eventually. Now. Down the hall. Mia's alarm went off. He heard her groan, heard the soft thump of her feet hitting the floor, heard her shuffle toward the bathroom. Daniel wiped his face with both hands. Though it was dry, he still hadn't cried, and he put himself back together because in about 90 seconds, an 8-year-old was going to come around that corner and he was going to have to tell her that her grandfather was gone. He was going to have to be the strong one. He was always going to have to be the strong one. There was nobody else. There was nobody left but him. "Dad?" Mia appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes hair, a disaster. "Why are you up? It's still dark." Daniel knelt down. He'd learned after Sarah that you tell children the truth on their level at their height, where they can see your face. "Hey, baby," he said softly. "Come here a second. I need to tell you something, and it's a sad something, okay? So come here." She came already scared, and he took both her small hands. "Grandpa died this morning," Daniel said gently. "In his sleep. It didn't hurt. He wasn't scared. He just went to sleep and didn't wake up. And the last thing he did before that baby was talk about you. About how much he loved you. Okay, that's the truth." Mia's face did the thing that broke him worse than the phone call had. It crumpled slow, the understanding arriving in stages, and then she threw herself against his chest and cried, and Daniel held her, and finally with his daughter sobbing into his shoulder. Finally, at last, Daniel Hayes felt his own grief crack open too, and a few tears slid down into her hair. But only a few. Because even now, even here, some cold captain in the back of his mind was already running the numbers, already planning the calls, already bracing for the wall. Grief was a luxury. He'd get to it later. He always got to everything later. Later never came, but he kept promising himself it would. He didn't know that in Illinois, Ana Reyes's quiet surveillance had already flagged the death. He didn't know that within the hour, a report would land on Victoria Sterling's desk with 3 words at the top. The father passed. He didn't know that a woman he'd saved was right now sitting up straighter, saying to her chief of staff, "It's time." He only knew that his daughter was crying, and his father was gone, and the wall was here. The wall's second blow landed that afternoon, and it landed at work. Daniel had gone in. Of course he'd gone in. He couldn't afford not to, and there was a grim mercy in the routine of it, in the mindless physical labor in being a body that fixed broken things instead of a man who felt broken things. He was up on a lift replacing a bank of failed lights in a jet bridge when his supervisor, a decent enough guy named Combs, came and stood at the bottom and called up to him with a face that told Daniel everything before Combs opened his mouth. "Danny, come down a sec. We gotta talk." Daniel came down. "I'm real sorry about your dad." Combs started, and Daniel's stomach dropped, because "I'm real sorry about your dad" is never the whole sentence. It's always the opening of a worse sentence. "I am. That's a hell of a thing. But Danny the leave. You blew through all of it, and then some. HR's been on me. You've missed, I covered for you as long as I could, but there's a limit, and we hit it, and then we went past it." Combs. "They're not firing you." Combs said it fast, holding up a hand. "It's not nobody's firing you. You're a good worker, best I got. But they're cutting you back. Part-time. No benefits. Effective next week." He winced. "I fought it. I want you to know I fought it. But their thing is, you've been unreliable, and I couldn't with the attendance. I didn't have a leg to stand on. I'm sorry, man. I really am." Daniel stood there in the jet bridge and felt the second wall hit the first. Part-time. No benefits. He did the math instantly, helplessly, the way he did everything. Part-time maintenance money did not pay his rent. It did not touch Sarah's old debt or his father's new one, or the funeral he now had to somehow pay for. Part-time and no benefits for a single father with a kid was not a reduction. It was a death sentence with extra steps. "Okay," Daniel heard himself say. Flat. The medic voice. "Okay, Combs. I understand. Thanks for fighting it. That's it. You're not gonna—" "What am I gonna do?" Daniel said, and there was no anger in it, which was somehow worse. "You said it yourself. I don't have a leg to stand on. My dad died, and I sat by his bed instead of coming to work, and now I get to pay for it. That's how it goes. I know how it goes." He turned back to the lift. "I gotta finish these lights." Combs watched him a second, then walked away, and Daniel went back up the lift and replaced a bank of fluorescent tubes with hands that did not shake because he would not let them, and did the math over and over in his head until the numbers stopped meaning anything at all. The wall's third blow was waiting in his mailbox when he got home. 2 envelopes. He knew what they were before he touched them, the way he knew everything now. One from the hospital in Illinois. His father's, the balance forwarded to next of kin, faster than should have been decently possible, a 5-figure number in a cold little window. And one from a collection agency he'd been dodging for 2 years. The Sarah debt, and this one wasn't a reminder anymore. This one had words like final and legal action and wage garnishment in it. And Daniel stood at his own front door with his father dead that morning and his job gutted that afternoon, and his wife's 5-year-old debt threatening to garnish a wage he was about to barely have, and he felt the last of the water close over his head. I didn't go inside right away. He couldn't. Mia was at a neighbor's, Mrs. Alvarez, 2 doors down, who watched her sometimes. God bless her, and the house was empty and dark, and Daniel Hayes sat down on his own front step in the cold with 2 envelopes in his hand, and for the first time since a bedroom floor 5 years ago, he came apart. Not loudly. Daniel didn't do things loudly, but he sat on the step and put his face in his hands and his shoulders shook, and everything he'd been pushing down since 6:14 that morning since 5 years ago really came up all at once. His father was gone. His wife was gone. His job was gone. His money was gone. And he was so tired, he was so unspeakably tired of being the one who fixed everything, who felt nothing on schedule, who kept the lights on for everybody else, while his own house went dark. He'd spent 5 years being strong for a little girl, because there was nobody left but him, and he had finally completely run out of strong. "I can't," he said to nobody, to the cold, to a wife and a father who couldn't hear him. "I can't do this. I can't do it anymore. I'm sorry. I can't." And that exact moment, a broken man on a cold front step at the absolute bottom of his life, was the moment a black car turned onto his street. I didn't notice it at first. He was too far gone. But some old instinct made him look up when it slowed and then stopped at the curb right in front of his house. A car that did not belong on his street. Too clean, too new, too expensive. The kind of car that meant a bill collector or a process server or trouble. And Daniel's whole body went tense and defensive. Because of course, why not pile it on? Let's have the whole thing collapse in one single day. The back door opened, and a woman got out. Silver hair, a dark coat. She moved carefully the way a person moves when their body has recently been betrayed by it, one hand going briefly to her chest as she straightened. And even in the dark, even at 20 feet, even wrecked as he was, Daniel Hayes knew her instantly because he'd spent 20 of the most intense minutes of his life with his hands on her sternum, keeping her alive. The woman from the plane. Victoria Sterling stood on the cracked sidewalk in front of Daniel Hayes's rented house and looked at the man she'd come 3 states in 4 days, and 1 full recovery, to find and found him sitting on a front step in the cold, with his face wet and 2 envelopes crushed in his fist at the precise lowest moment of his entire life. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Daniel got to his feet, slowly wiping his face with the back of his hand. Humiliated to be caught like this, angry at the universe for arranging it defensive and raw, and about 1 wrong word from coming apart entirely. "No," he said. It came out rough. "No. Whatever this is, no. How did you even know? You need to go." "Mr. Hayes, how do you know my name?" His voice rose. "I didn't give anybody my name. That was the whole I didn't give anybody my name. I had you found." Victoria said it plainly. No apology, because she'd decided on the drive over that this man had had enough people manage him for one day. "I have resources. I use them. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. You saved my life on that airplane, Mr. Hayes, and then you vanished before I could so much as learn who you were, and I would not let that stand. So yes, I found you. I'm sorry if that's a violation. I'm not sorry I did it." Daniel let out a sound that wasn't a laugh. "Lady, you have got the worst timing of any human being alive. You understand that you have got—" His voice cracked, and he hated it. "My father died this morning. My dad. And I lost my job this afternoon. And I'm holding a bill in my hand right now that's going to garnish a paycheck. I don't even have any more for a debt from when my wife—" He stopped himself. "Shut it down. Put the wall back up. You need to go. Please. Whatever you came here to do, I can't. I don't have anything left for it. I'm empty. Go find somebody else to save you or thank or whatever this is. I'm done." He turned to go inside. "Your wife," Victoria said to his back. "Sarah." Daniel stopped dead. "She had a cardiac arrest." Victoria went on, her voice low and steady behind him. "In your home. 5 years ago. And you did CPR on her yourself with your own 2 hands for over 20 minutes, and she died anyway. And you were so decorated a paramedic before that, Mr. Hayes, a decade of it, the best in your district, that half of what I know about you came from award citations." She paused. "I know you did everything right for her. And I know that on that airplane, when you looked at me on that floor, you were seeing her. Weren't you? You did the exact same thing with the exact same hands, and this time it worked. And I imagine that is the cruelest possible thing that could have happened to you. To save a stranger with the hands that couldn't save your wife." Daniel stood with his back to her, absolutely rigid, and Victoria watched his shoulders begin to shake. "How dare you?" he said very quietly, not turning around. "How dare you come to my house and say her name?" "I dare," Victoria said, "because I'm alive to say it. Because I have a heartbeat right now, this second, only because of you. And I have spent every hour since that plane trying to understand what kind of man drags his own dead wife up out of his chest to save a stranger, and then walks away without letting anyone thank him. And now I'm standing in front of your house watching you have the worst day of your life, and I understand that I picked a monstrous moment, I do. But I'm not leaving, Mr. Hayes. You don't get to be the only person in the world who runs toward the thing everyone else runs away from. Today it's my turn. So no, I'm not going." Daniel turned around, and Victoria Sterling saw his face fully for the first time, not the sweating, focused face from the plane, not a freeze frame in a video, but the actual face of Daniel Hayes, wide open and wrecked and furious and grieving, and something in her chest went tight that had nothing to do with her damaged heart. "You want to thank me," Daniel said, and now there was heat in it, 5 years of heat. "Fine, thank you. You're welcome. I saved your life. Congratulations, you're alive, go live it. But don't stand on my sidewalk and act like you know me because you read some file. You don't know me. You know a story your people put together. You know facts. You don't know what it was like." His voice broke wide open. "You don't know what it's like to do everything right and have it not matter. To be the best there is at keeping people alive, and watch your own wife die on the bedroom floor while you're doing perfect compressions, perfect textbook, and she just goes anyway. And there's not one single thing you could have done different, and that's supposed to make it better. Everybody says that's supposed to make it better. You did everything you could. Like that helps. Like that's not the worst part." "It is the worst part," Victoria said. "You're right. It's the worst part. That there was nothing to do differently. Because it means you can't fix it. And you're a man who fixes things, so a thing you can't fix just sits inside you forever." Daniel stared at her. "I don't know your grief, Mr. Hayes," Victoria said quietly. "You're right that I don't. But I know what it is to be very good at something and have it be worthless against the one thing that matters. I've built an entire life out of being good at things. And 4 days ago, I was dead on the floor of an airplane, and not $1 of it, not one board seat, not one award, could do a single thing for me. The only thing that could do anything for me was you. A man who quit. A man who decided he was worthless because being the best wasn't enough one time." She took a step closer. "And I have to tell you, from the floor of that plane, from where I was lying, you did not look worthless. You looked like the only real thing in the world." Daniel's face was streaming now, and he wasn't bothering to hide it anymore. He was too tired to hide anything. "What do you want?" he whispered. "Just tell me what you actually want, because I don't have anything. I'm empty. There's nothing here for you to want." And Victoria Sterling looked at this broken, brilliant, grieving man standing outside a house he was about to lose, and she almost said it. She almost led with the money, the job, the offer, the whole rescue she'd assembled with Reyes and Marcus and all her resources. It was right there. She could have fixed his entire life in a single sentence, but she didn't. Because she'd learned something in 4 days of thinking about a man who wanted nothing, and Marcus's voice was in her ear. It has to let him keep his dignity, or he won't take it, and honestly, he shouldn't. And she understood standing there that if she led with the rescue, she'd be doing to him the exact thing the whole world did to everyone, turning a person into a transaction. Buying him. And this was the one man alive who couldn't be bought, which was precisely why she couldn't stop thinking about him. So instead of leading with the offer, Victoria Sterling did something she had not done in 30 years. She told the truth about herself. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I came here to give, not take. But before I say what I need to tell you something, because you just accused me of not knowing you, and that's fair, so let me even it out. Let me tell you something. Nobody at my company knows. Nobody on my board. Nobody." She took a breath, and her hand went to her chest again, and this time, it wasn't the heart. "On that plane, when I was going in that dark place right before you brought me back, do you know what I thought? I thought nobody's waiting. I have 140,000 employees and a $40 billion company, and a daughter I speak to twice a year, and lying there dying. I did the math. Mr. Hayes, I'm a numbers person too, and the number I got was 0. 0 people who would truly grieve me. And I decided in that dark that I might as well just stay. That there wasn't much point coming back to a life where the honest answer was 0. Daniel went very still, and then, Victoria said, her voice shaking. Now the imperious CEO entirely gone. Just a frightened 61-year-old woman on a cracked sidewalk. Then this voice cut through it, this stranger's voice. And do you know what it said? It said, "You've got people. Somebody's waiting for you somewhere. Somebody always is. So you're gonna come back for them." She let out a broken little laugh. "You made it up. You didn't know me. You had no idea whether anybody was waiting for me. The true answer was, nobody was. But you said it like it was just obviously true. Like of course somebody was waiting. Everybody's got somebody. And I believed you. In that moment, I believed you more than I believed the math. And I came back. I came back because a stranger with his hands in my chest told me somebody was waiting, and I didn't want to make him a liar. She wiped her eyes, fierce, almost angry at herself for the tears. So don't tell me I don't know you, and don't tell me you have nothing left to give, because you already gave me the only thing that's ever mattered, and you didn't even know you were doing it. You gave me a reason. On a day, you were flying to watch your own father die, with your own life falling apart. You looked at a dying stranger, and you lied to her about being loved so she'd choose to live. That's who you are, Mr. Hayes. That's the man I found. And I'm not here to buy him or thank him or make him a spectacle. I'm here because that man is standing on a front step in the cold at the bottom of his life, and for once in his entire life, somebody is going to run toward him. The street was silent. Daniel Hayes stood there with 2 envelopes crushed in his hand. His father dead, his job gone, his money gone, his walls all finally completely down, and he looked at the woman he'd saved, and the thing he'd been holding back since 6:14 that morning, since 5 years ago, finally broke all the way open. I don't know how to let anybody help me, he said. The words came out cracked and small, the truest thing he'd said out loud in half a decade. I've been the one who helps. That's who I am. I help. I don't get helped. If I get helped, then I don't know who I am anymore. Do you understand? If I'm not the one holding everybody up, then what am I? I'm just a guy who couldn't save his wife. I'm just a guy who lost everything. I don't know how to be that guy. I don't know how to let it in. I know, Victoria said gently. I know you don't. Neither do I. We're the same that way, you and me. We give, and we'd rather die than take. She almost smiled. Literally, in my case. I'd rather have stayed dead than come back to a life that owed me nothing. So let's you and me do the hard thing together just this once. Let me help you. Not because you're pathetic, not because you're a charity case, not because I pity you. God, the last thing on earth you are, is pitiable. Let me help you because 4 days ago you helped me, and that's not a transaction, that's not me paying you back. That's just what people do. When somebody's drowning, you reach in. You taught me that. On a plane, with your hands. Now let me reach in. Daniel looked at her for a long, long moment. And then before he could answer, before either of them could say another word, a small voice cut across the cold, dark street from 2 houses down. Dad? They both turned. Mia was standing on Mrs. Alvarez's front walk coat, half zipped, staring across the dark at the strange black car, and the strange silver-haired woman, and her father standing there with a wet face and crushed papers in his hand. And her eyes moved from her father to the woman, and something flickered across her small, watchful, people-reading face recognition, dawning slow and certain. Dad, Mia said again, and started walking toward them faster now, her eyes locked on Victoria. Dad, that's... She stopped a few feet away, staring up at the woman, and when she spoke again, her voice was full of wonder and something close to fear. That's the lady from the plane. That's the lady you saved. Victoria Sterling looked down at the little girl who'd said the thing you did to Mommy. The little girl from the file. The little girl whose small hand on her father's arm had gotten him out of his seat and saved Victoria's life just as surely as his hands had. And Victoria Sterling, who had told a broken man on a sidewalk that the honest number of people waiting for her was 0, felt her throat close. Yes, Victoria said softly, kneeling down slow, one hand on her chest, to meet the child at her own height, the way she'd watched Daniel do in the file, the way good people did. Yes, sweetheart. I'm the lady from the plane. My name is Victoria. And your dad. Her voice broke, and she let it in front of the child, in front of the man, in front of all of it. Your dad saved my life, and I came a very long way to tell him thank you, and to see if maybe I could help your family the way he helped me. Would that be all right with you? Mia looked at her for a long moment with those serious, watchful eyes. Then she looked up at her father, at his wet face, at the crushed envelopes she was too young to read, but old enough to understand, and back at the kneeling woman. And Mia Hayes, 8.5, said the thing that broke the whole night open. The thing that undid 5 years of a proud man's walls in a single sentence, the thing Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. Dad, she said, reaching out to take her father's hand. The man on the plane believed he could save somebody. So how come you never let anybody believe they can save you? How come you never let anybody believe they can save you? The question hung in the cold air, and Daniel Hayes stood on his own front step, with his daughter's small hand in his, and understood that he had been outmaneuvered by an 8-year-old. Not tricked. Seen. Mia had spent 5 years watching him, cataloging him the way she cataloged everyone, and she'd finally said out loud, the thing she'd figured out a long time ago, that her father would break himself in half before he'd ever let anyone carry the other end. Daniel knelt down. He got to Mia's height, and he looked at his daughter, and he didn't have a wall left to hide behind. "I don't know, baby," he said honestly. I think somewhere along the way, I decided that if I let somebody help me, it meant I couldn't do it myself. And a dad's supposed to do it himself. That's the job." He swallowed hard. "But maybe that's not right. Maybe that's a thing I got wrong." "You got it wrong," Mia said with the total confidence of a child. "Rosa helped Grandpa. That's not because Grandpa was weak. That's because that's what people do." Daniel let out a wet, broken laugh, because that was the second time in 10 minutes someone had said that exact sentence to him. That's what people do, and he was starting to think the universe was trying to get a message through his thick skull. He looked up at Victoria, still kneeling a few feet away, one hand on her chest, watching the two of them with tears standing in her eyes. "I'm not taking a check," Daniel said. It came out rough, but it wasn't a rejection anymore. It was a negotiation, and Victoria knew the difference immediately, and something in her chest unlocked. "I wasn't going to offer you a check," she said. "I told you. A check would insult you, and it would insult me, and it wouldn't fix the actual problem, which isn't money." "The actual problem is very much money," Daniel said. "I've got 2 funerals worth of debt and a job that just got cut to nothing." "The money is the symptom," Victoria said. "The problem is that a man who should be saving lives is fixing light fixtures to punish himself for something that was never his fault. Fix that, and the money problem takes care of itself. Leave that, and I could hand you $1 million tonight, and you'd still be a broken man fixing lights in 5 years, just a solvent one." She got to her feet, slowly wincing, and Daniel reflexively, before he could think about it, reached out and steadied her elbow. Old instinct. Help the person whose body is failing them. Victoria noticed. She filed it away. "Let's get out of the cold," she said. "You've got a little girl freezing on a sidewalk and a lot to talk about. Is there coffee in that house?"
Sure.
There was coffee. Bad coffee in a chipped pot, in a small kitchen that Victoria Sterling, who had penthouses on 2 coasts, walked into like it was the most important room she'd ever entered, because to her that night it was. Mia was sent to bed after a while, though not before she'd extracted from Victoria a solemn promise that she was really real and would really still be there in the morning. Daniel tucked her in, and when he came back to the kitchen, Victoria was sitting at his scratched little table with her hands wrapped around a mug, looking at a framed photo on the counter. Sarah laughing, holding a much smaller Mia, and she didn't pretend she hadn't been looking at it. "She was beautiful," Victoria said. "She was," Daniel said, and sat down heavy across from her. "Okay, so, say it. Whatever the offer is. You've been carrying it around this whole time, I can feel it. Just say it." Victoria set down her mug. "My company runs a program," she said. "Or it's going to. It doesn't fully exist yet. I'm building it, and I've been building it since the plane on the drive here in the hospital at 3 in the morning. It's a re-entry program for former healthcare workers. Medics, nurses, techs, good ones, skilled ones, people who left the field. Some left because of burnout. Some because of trauma. Some because life knocked them down and they never got up. The country is short, 100,000 of these people, and meanwhile, there are thousands of them out there fixing light fixtures and driving trucks and hating themselves, sitting on a decade of skill they've convinced themselves they're not allowed to use anymore." She looked at him. "I want you to be the first one back through that door. And then I want you to help me build the door so the next ones don't have to be found by a billionaire on their worst day." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "You built a whole program," he said slowly, "in 4 days, because of me. I didn't build it because of you. I built it because of me." Victoria's voice was low. Because on that airplane, the most valuable thing in the world wasn't my technology or my money. It was one trained human being who ran toward me. And I run a health company that had somehow forgotten that the whole point is human beings. I've spent a decade buying machines and apps and platforms, and I never once spent a dime on a person. You didn't just save my life on that plane, Mr. Hayes. You showed me what my company was supposed to be for and had stopped being. So no, I didn't build it because of you. I built it because you woke me up. But I want you to be the first one because you're the proof. If I can bring you back the best medic in your district, a man who quit and hid for 5 years, then I can bring anybody back. Daniel stared into his coffee. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. What if I can't do it? Then you can't do it and we'll figure out something else. No, listen to me. He looked up and there was raw fear in his face, the fear he'd hidden from everyone for 5 years. You don't understand what you're asking. You want to put me back in a room where people are dying, where it's my job to save them. And someday, not maybe someday, it's medicine. It's a statistical certainty. Someday I'm going to do everything right, and somebody's going to die anyway. Just like Sarah. And I don't know if I can survive that a second time. The first time it ended me. It turned me into a guy who fixes lights so he never has to feel it again. What happens to me the second time? What happens to Mia if I put myself back in that room and it breaks me all over again, and this time there's no coming back? His voice cracked. I'm all she's got. I can't gamble her father on whether I'm strong enough to watch somebody die again. And there it was, the real wall. The one behind all the other walls. The actual reason Daniel Hayes had spent 5 years small and invisible. Not pride, not money, fear. The bone-deep terror of a man who had loved his work, been the best at it, and had it turn around and cost him the one thing he couldn't live without. Victoria didn't rush to answer. She sat with it. She'd learned in 4 days that this man had a bottomless detector for anything glib. Can I tell you what I think? She finally said. And you can throw me out of your house if I'm wrong. Go ahead. I don't think you're afraid of watching someone die. Victoria leaned forward. I think you've convinced yourself that's the fear, because it's a reasonable fear, it's a respectable fear. But I don't think that's it. I watched you on that plane, Mr. Hayes. You did watch me almost die. You had your hands on a dying woman, and you did not flinch. That's not a man who's afraid of death. She held his eyes. I think what you're actually afraid of is hoping again. I think you built a small, gray, safe little life where nothing good can happen, so that nothing bad can happen either. And it's numb, and it's lonely, but it's safe. And the thing that terrifies you isn't failing, it's letting yourself want something again. Because wanting is how they get you. You wanted Sarah, and losing her nearly killed you, so you decided never to want anything that big again. And a life where you save people, a life that matters, that's a life full of wanting. And you're not scared of the dying, Mr. Hayes. You're scared of the living. The kitchen was dead silent. Daniel Hayes stared at this woman he'd known for a total of maybe 2 hours across 2 encounters, and he felt like she'd reached into his chest, the same way he'd reached into hers, and found the thing that was barely beating, and named it. Get out, he said. His voice shook. But he didn't mean it, and they both knew he didn't mean it, and he didn't move, and neither did she. No, Victoria said gently. I don't think I will. And Daniel Hayes put his face in his hands at his own kitchen table, and for the second time that night, for the second time in 5 years, he let himself be seen all the way down to the bottom. How do I do it? He whispered through his hands. Even if you're right. Even if it's the living I'm scared of. How do I start wanting things again? I don't remember how. I genuinely don't remember how. You don't have to remember, Victoria said. You just have to do one thing you're afraid of, and then the next one. That's all it ever is. You already did the first one. You got up out of seat 31B. You've been terrified ever since I'd bet because getting up woke something up. You'd worked very hard to keep asleep. So don't try to want everything again all at once. Just say yes to the program. One thing, one scary thing, and we'll do the next scary thing when we get there. Daniel lowered his hands. His eyes were red and wrecked, And for the first time, something else, something that might have been the very first flicker of a man deciding to live. On conditions, he said. Name them. I don't want to be your project, your comeback story, your proof, your inspirational whatever. I saw the way you said it, you're the proof. I'm not proof. I'm not a symbol. I'm a guy. If I do this, I do it as a guy and I earn it like a guy, and there's no special treatment because I saved the boss's life. I don't want anybody in that program looking at me and knowing that, ever. I want to earn my way in like everybody else, take the same classes, pass the same tests, fail the same tests. If I get a single thing handed to me because of who you are, I'm out. Because if I get handed it, it doesn't count. And if it doesn't count, then I'm not actually back. I'm just a rich woman's pet. He leaned forward. I've spent 5 years being nobody. I'd rather stay nobody than be your somebody. If I come back, I come back on my own hands. The same hands. Nobody else's. Victoria Sterling looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something Daniel didn't expect. She smiled, a real one, the first real smile he'd seen on her, and it took 10 years off her face. You have no idea, she said, how much easier you just made this. Because a man who wanted the special treatment would have been the wrong man, and I'd have had to figure out how to walk it back. But you just proved the whole thesis. Deal. No special treatment. You earn it or you don't. I'll do one thing, and you can be as angry about it as you want, but it's non-negotiable. I'll clear the debt. The old debt, your wife's, your father's. Not as a gift to you, as a gift to Mia. Because that debt garnishing your wages will sink you before you ever finish the program. And I'm not going to watch you drown in Sarah's medical bills for the crime of loving her. That one's happening. Everything else you earn. Are we agreed? Daniel wanted to fight it. She could see him wanting to fight it. And then he looked toward the hallway where his daughter was sleeping, and something in him let go. For Mia, he said quietly. Not for me. For Mia. For Mia, Victoria agreed. And Daniel Hayes reached across his scratched kitchen table and shook the hand of the woman he'd saved, and it was though neither of them said it the moment he decided to come back to life. The next months were the hardest of Daniel's life, and that was saying something for a man whose wife and father had both died, because deciding to come back and actually coming back turned out to be two entirely different things. The program was real. Victoria had built it fast and built it right. A rigorous re-entry track partnered with a hospital system, classroom hours and simulation labs and supervised clinical rotations. And true to her word, she'd buried Daniel in it as an anonymous applicant. Nobody in his cohort knew he'd saved the woman whose name was on the funding. Nobody knew about the video. To them, he was just Hayes, the older guy, the single dad, the one who'd been out of the field for 5 years, and it showed. And it did show. God, it showed. That was the thing that nearly broke him in the first month. Daniel had walked in secretly, arrogantly certain that the skill was all still there, that he'd been the best once, and the best doesn't leave. And in the very first simulation lab, he learned how wrong he was. Medicine had moved. 5 years is a geological age in medicine. The protocols had changed. The drug guidelines had changed. There was new equipment he'd never touched, new algorithms, a whole electronic charting system that the 24-year-olds in his cohort navigated like it was a video game, and Daniel stared at like it was written in Greek. The first written exam he failed. He sat in his car in the hospital parking garage afterward, with the failing score on his phone, and felt the old voice come roaring back. See, you're not that man anymore. That man is dead. You're a light fixture guy, pretending. Go home. Quit. It was always going to end like this. And his thumb hovered over Victoria's number, ready to call, and tell her she'd bet on the wrong horse, tell her he was done, tell her thanks for the debt, but the rest was a mistake. I didn't call her. He called his sister instead, and cried a little, and then he drove home and helped Mia with her homework. And something about sitting at the table, watching his 8-year-old grind through long division without quitting, just doing it wrong and erasing it and doing it again, made him ashamed of himself. You messed that one up, he told her, pointing at a problem. I know. Mia erased it. So I do it again. That's simple, huh, Dad? She looked at him like he was slow. It's just math. You don't quit at math because you got one wrong. You just do it again till it's right. Daniel looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he got out his own books, and he sat down next to her at the table, and the two of them did their homework together, an 8-year-old on long division, and her 38-year-old father on cardiac pharmacology, and he did it again till it was right. Night after night. He was the oldest one in the program and the most out of practice, and he had a child to raise and a full life to run, and he outworked every 24-year-old in that cohort by simply refusing the way his daughter refused to quit at the ones he got wrong. The younger ones doubted him. Of course they did. There was one in particular, a sharp, cocky kid named Trevor maybe. 25 top of every exam, who looked at Daniel the way the young look at the old, in a field that worships the new, with a kind of pity dressed up as respect. Nice that they let the older guys try. Shame he can't keep up. No offense, man. Trevor said one day, watching Daniel struggle through the charting software for the 3rd time. But why are you even doing this? Like you're what, 40? You've been out 5 years. By the time you're licensed again, you'll be what, 2 years from now? Seems like a lot of pain for not much runway. I'd have just found something easier. Daniel didn't take the bait. He'd raised a daughter. He'd learned patience. You ever save anybody, Trevor? He asked, not looking up from the screen. What? With your hands. A real person dying in front of you. You ever bring anybody back? Trevor shifted. I mean in Sims. Not Sims. Real. Not yet. I'm not licensed yet. Yeah. Daniel finished the chart correctly and stood up. When you do, and you will, you're smart, you'll be good at this. You'll understand why the runway doesn't matter. It's not about how many years you get. It's about the one person in front of you right now. You could have 30 years left and waste everyone. I could have 2 and save 100 people. It was never about the runway, kid. He clapped Trevor once on the shoulder, not unkindly. You'll get it. Probably the first time somebody dies on you. That's usually when everybody gets it. He walked out. And Trevor stood there, and something in the cocky kid's face shifted because he'd just been schooled by the older guy he'd been quietly pitying, and he knew it. Victoria changed too over those months, and it surprised everyone who knew her, and it surprised her most of all. She'd started by building one program for Daniel. But the thing about waking up is that you can't wake up halfway. Once Victoria Sterling had seen on the floor of an airplane that the entire point of her $40 billion health empire was supposed to be the human being who runs toward you. She couldn't unsee it, and it started changing every decision she made. She sat in board meetings where they talked about margins and market share, and she heard herself asking questions she'd never asked. Who does this actually help? Not the shareholders, the patients. The sick ones. The forgotten ones. The ones without lobbyists. Her board thought she'd gone soft. Some of them said so carefully, in the way you carefully tell a billionaire you think she's lost it. One of them, an old ally named Prescott, cornered her after a meeting. Victoria. The re-entry program, the Charity Care Initiative. This is a lot in a very short time right after a major medical event. People are asking if you're entirely yourself. I'm more myself than I've been in 20 years, Victoria said. The stock. Prescott. She stopped him. I died. 4 months ago I was dead on the floor of an airplane for 4 minutes. And do you know what came to save me? Not the company. Not the stock. Not one thing I built. A broken man who'd quit medicine came to save me because he still had somewhere under all his pain. The thing this entire industry is supposed to be about and forgot. And I have decided to spend the rest of whatever time I've got remembering it. If the board doesn't like it, the board can vote me out and I'll go do it without them. But I'm done building machines that forgot what they were for. Are we clear? They were clear. Prescott left, and Victoria sat alone in her office and realized her hands were shaking not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in decades. The feeling of being on the right side of her own life. She and Daniel talked over those months. Not often and never with special treatment. She was scrupulous about that. She'd never once shown up at his rotations or pulled him aside. But sometimes late one of them would call the other, the two people in the world who'd each reached into the other's chest, and they'd talk. About Sarah sometimes. About Victoria's daughter in London, who Victoria had finally actually called and talked to for 2 hours and cried with for the first time since the girl was small. About fear. About the strange, terrifying, exhilarating work of two people who'd rather die than be helped, learning slowly, clumsily, how to let something in. "I called my daughter," Victoria told him one night. "Emma. We talked for 2 hours. She cried. I cried. She's flying out next month. 20 years. Daniel, and it took a heart attack and a stranger on a plane to make me pick up the phone." She paused. "You did that too. Not just my heart. That." "I didn't do anything," Daniel said. "You did that. You told me somebody was waiting," Victoria said quietly. "Turns out somebody was. She just needed me to call. So, thank you. Again. For a thing you didn't know you did. Again." And then came the day Daniel Hayes had been dreading since the moment he'd shaken Victoria's hand across his scratched kitchen table. The day someone died. It was near the end of his supervised clinical rotations months, in licensed provisionally, now working real shifts, under a preceptor in a real emergency department. He'd gotten good again, better than good, the old skill fully awake, and married now to the new knowledge he'd bled to relearn, and he'd started to let himself believe cautiously, in the tiny, careful way he was learning to let himself believe things that maybe he really was back. And then, an ambulance brought in an older man, mid-60s, cardiac arrest, and Daniel was on the team, and they worked him. Daniel and the preceptor, and the nurses, a full code everything, right? Everything. Textbook compressions and drugs and shocks. Daniel's own hands on the man's chest at one point, doing the exact thing he'd done for Sarah, the exact thing he'd done for Victoria. And this time, it didn't work. The man died. The attending called it time of death. The room did the thing rooms do. The sudden deflate, the stepping back, the quiet. And Daniel Hayes stood there with a dead stranger in front of him, and a wife dead 5 years, and felt the whole thing rushing up. The exact thing he'd told Victoria. He was afraid of the thing he'd sworn might end him a second time. He waited for it to break him. He stood there, and he waited to shatter. And it hurt. God, it hurt. It hurt like hell. The man had a family in the waiting room, and Daniel was going to have to see their faces. But as he stood there in the terrible quiet, Daniel Hayes noticed something that stopped his breath. He was still standing. It hurt, and he was still standing. It was awful, and he had not shattered. The thing he'd been certain would end him a second time had come in full, exactly as bad as he'd feared, and he was still on his feet. Because somewhere in the last months, without noticing, he'd become a man who could hold this. A man strong enough to do everything right. Lose anyway. Grieve it, and stay standing. The thing he'd run from for 5 years had happened, and he'd survived it, and he understood, standing over a stranger, he couldn't save the thing he'd never let himself understand about Sarah. That doing everything right and losing anyway didn't make him a failure. It made him a human being who'd stood in the hardest place there is and not looked away. Later, he'd have to go tell the family. He'd do it well, gently, honestly, at their height, the way he told Mia hard things. And one of them, the dead man's daughter, would grab his hand and thank him through her tears for fighting so hard for her father, and Daniel would understand that this too was part of it. That you couldn't save everyone, but you could stand with them in the losing, and that mattered too. That mattered more than he'd ever let himself know. But right then, in that room over that stranger, Daniel Hayes did something he had not done for Sarah, had never once allowed himself in 5 years of punishment. He forgave himself, not with a big speech, not with tears. Just quietly standing there, he let go of a thing he'd been carrying since a bedroom floor 5 years ago. The lie that Sarah's death had been his failure, and in its place he let in the truth his father had tried to give him in a hospital bed. The truth Victoria had named on a cold sidewalk. The truth he'd needed to lose a stranger, to finally believe that he had done everything a man could do, and she had died, and both of those things were true, and neither one made him guilty. He'd been sentenced for a crime that never existed. And standing over a stranger, he couldn't save Daniel Hayes. Finally, quietly pardoned himself. Then he wiped his face and squared his shoulders and went out to the waiting room to sit down with a grieving family and be once again at last all the way, the man he was always meant to be. The family in that waiting room never knew that the man who sat down to grieve with them had minutes earlier forgiven himself over their loved one's body. They only knew that a doctor with tired, kind eyes told them the truth gently, and stayed longer than he had to. And when the dead man's daughter grabbed his hand and thanked him for fighting, he squeezed back and said, "He wasn't alone. I want you to know that. He wasn't alone, and we didn't stop trying, not for 1 second." And she wept, and Daniel let her, and he did not run from it. And that was how he knew for certain that the man on the plane was finally home to stay. He passed his boards 11 weeks later. I didn't tell anyone the day the results came. He'd learned that about himself, that the big moments he needed to hold quietly first. He sat in his car in the same parking garage where months earlier he'd nearly quit, and he looked at the word pass on his phone, and he didn't call Victoria, and he didn't call his sister. He drove home. He picked Mia up from Mrs. Alvarez's, and at the kitchen table over the bad coffee pot and a plate of the peanut butter sandwiches that were still somehow the food that held their whole life together, he told his daughter first. "Mia, remember the tests I've been doing, the grown-up homework? The ones you kept getting wrong," she said with the merciless honesty of a 9-year-old. "The ones I kept getting wrong," Daniel agreed. "Well, I did them again till they were right, just like you told me, and today I got the last one right." He had to stop for a second. "Your dad's a paramedic again, baby, a real one. It's official. I get to help people for a living again." Mia looked at him for a long moment with those serious, watchful eyes, the eyes that had gotten him out of seat 31B, the eyes that had asked, "How come you never let anybody believe they can save you?" And then she climbed off her chair and into his lap and wrapped both arms around his neck. "I knew it," she whispered into his shoulder. "I knew he was still in there, the man from the plane. I knew you were just hiding him." Daniel held his daughter and cried finally, the way he hadn't let himself cry at his father's bedside or on the cold front step. Not the tears of a man breaking, but the other kind. The kind that comes when something that's been clenched for years finally safely lets go. "Yeah," he said into her hair. "Yeah, he was just hiding. But he's not hiding anymore. He's home." He called Victoria that night after Mia was asleep. "I passed," he said. There was a silence on the line, and then Victoria Sterling, CEO of a $40 billion company, a woman who negotiated with senators and stared down boards, made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. "Say it again," she said. "I passed, Victoria. I'm licensed. I'm back." "I never doubted you," she said, which was a lie, and they both knew it was a lie, and it was the good kind of lie, the kind you tell someone you love, because in the moment, it becomes true retroactively. "That's not true. I doubted you constantly. I lay awake worried I'd talked you into something that would break you. But you did it. You did the whole thing on your own hands exactly like you said. Nobody handed you a single piece of it." "Nobody handed me a single piece of it," Daniel agreed quietly. "Except the debt and the door. You handed me the door. You walked through it. Anybody can hold a door. Not everybody walks through." They were quiet a moment, the two of them. 3 states apart. The 2 people in the world who'd each reached into the other's chest and found the thing that was barely beating and refused to let it stop. "There's something I want to ask you," Victoria said finally, "and I want you to actually think about it before you say no, which I know is your reflex. The program worked. You're the proof, and I know you hate that word, but you are. And now that you've done it, I have a room full of people who've heard there's a re-entry track and they want in. Nurses, medics, good people who got knocked down. Daniel, there are so many of them. So many more than I ever knew." Her voice caught. "I can build the classrooms, and I can write the checks. But I can't stand in front of a room full of broken healthcare workers and tell them it's possible to come back, because I've never come back from anything. I've never been down. You have. You're the only person alive who can look those people in the eye and say, I know exactly where you are because I was there, and here's how you climb out." Daniel was quiet. "I'm asking you to help me run it," Victoria said. "Not as my project, as my partner. You keep working the ambulance if you want it. I'd never take that from you. You earned it. But on the side with me, help me build the thing that finds the next Daniel Hayes before he loses 5 years. Before some billionaire has to stumble onto him half dead on a plane. Help me build the door for the ones coming behind you. Daniel looked out his kitchen window at the dark street, where months ago a black car had pulled up at the lowest moment of his life. Sarah wanted to open a clinic, he said quietly. Did I ever tell you that, a free one? For people who couldn't pay. She used to talk about it all the time. That was her dream, and when she died, I buried that too, along with everything else. I couldn't stand to think about it. He swallowed. If I do this with you, if we build this thing, I want her name on part of it, somewhere. A wing, a fund, something. The Sarah Hayes something. Because she should have gotten to do this and she didn't, and the least I can do is finish it for her. The line was silent, and then Victoria said, thick-voiced, the Sarah Hayes Foundation. That's the whole thing. Not a wing. The whole foundation. We build it in her name. And Daniel Hayes, standing in his kitchen, felt his dead wife's dream come back to life in his hands, and understood that nothing you love is ever really wasted, that it just waits sometimes for years for you to be ready to carry it again. Okay, he said. Okay, let's build it. For Sarah, for your Emma, for the next guy in seat 31B who thinks he's nobody. He let out a breath. For all of them. The foundation grew faster than either of them imagined, because it turned out the world was starving for exactly what they were offering, and because a story like theirs, once it finally got told, moved people in a way no advertising ever could. And it did finally get told. Not the way Daniel had feared, not as a spectacle, not as billionaire's viral rescuer revealed, but on his own terms, in his own words months later when he was ready. Because it turned out, the video had never died. The vanishing hero was still a mystery. The internet picked at, and reporters still occasionally tried to crack it. And one day Victoria said to him gently, "They're going to find out eventually. These things always come out. You can let it be their story, or you can make it yours. Your choice. I'll back whatever you decide." Daniel thought about it for a long time, and then he decided that a man who'd spent 5 years hiding was done hiding, and that the story wasn't actually about him anyway, so he told it. He sat down and he told the whole thing, not the heroic parts, but the true parts. The part where he froze in seat 31B and almost let a woman die because he was too broken to move. The part where his 8-year-old's hand on his arm was the only reason he got up. The part about Sarah and the bedroom floor, and the 5 years he'd thrown in the garbage punishing himself for a crime that never existed. The part where the woman he saved came and found him on the worst day of his life and refused to leave. He told all of it, the shame and the fear and the grief, because he'd learned that the shame and the fear and the grief were the parts that actually helped people, that nobody was ever saved by a hero who never struggled. But a whole lot of people could be saved by a broken man who found his way back. And people came. God, they came. Medics who'd quit after a bad call. Nurses who'd burned out during the worst years and never gone back. A trauma surgeon who'd lost a child and lost herself. They came because Daniel Hayes stood in front of them and said the words no polished spokesman could say. I know exactly where you are. I lived in seat 31B for 5 years. And I'm telling you it's possible to get up. I'm proof. Here's my hand. Get up. Trevor, the cocky kid from the cohort, came to work for the foundation. He'd changed after his own first patient died on him exactly the way Daniel said he would, and he'd sought Daniel out and said quietly, "You were right, about the runway, about all of it. I get it now." And Daniel had put him to work because a kid who'd been humbled by the work was worth 10 who never had been. Kayla came too, the flight attendant, the 23-year-old who hadn't frozen. Daniel had tracked her down himself months earlier to thank her properly, and it turned out she'd been so shaken and so moved by that day on the plane that she'd started nursing school. She wrote him a letter about it. He kept it framed on his desk next to Sarah's photo, the 2 women who'd taught him, one by dying, one by not freezing what his hands were actually for. Victoria's daughter. Emma flew out and stayed, and then kept staying, and Victoria Sterling, who had once done the dying woman's math and gotten 0 people waiting, found that the number had quietly, without her noticing, climbed. Emma. Daniel. Mia, who had adopted Victoria as a sort of glamorous, terrifying honorary grandmother and bossed her around mercilessly. Kayla. Trevor. A whole foundation full of people who'd been given their lives back and would have walked through fire for the silver-haired woman who funded it and the tired-eyed man who ran it. The number was not 0 anymore. The number was more than Victoria could count, and she'd built a career on counting. "I did the math wrong," she told Daniel once, watching Mia teach Emma some clapping game at a foundation picnic. "On the plane, when I thought nobody was waiting, I did it wrong." "No," Daniel said. "You did it right. The answer just changed. That's the whole point of coming back, Victoria. You come back so the answer can change." 2 years to the day, after a woman collapsed in first class at 35,000 feet, Daniel Hayes was working a shift when the ambulance radio crackled with a call that stopped his heart for a beat. A cardiac arrest, an older woman down at a shopping center across town. And for one cold instant, he was back in seat 31B, frozen, sure he'd fail. Then he was moving. No hesitation. Not 1 second of it. Because that man was gone now, the frozen man, and in his place was the one who ran toward it. They got there in 4 minutes. The woman was on the ground, a crowd around her phones, up always the phones, and a young man doing chest compressions, badly panicked, but doing them. And Daniel dropped to his knees beside him and took over with the calm that came from somewhere below thought. "You did great," he told the terrified kid exactly the way he'd once told a terrified flight attendant. "You kept her going till we got here. That's everything. I've got her now." And Daniel Hayes put his hands on a stranger's chest. The same hands, the ones that couldn't save Sarah and did save Victoria, and had saved dozens more in the 2 years since. And he leaned down close to a dying woman's face, and the words came out of him the way they always came out now, no longer torn from some buried place, but flowing clean and sure from a man fully finally awake. "Stay awake. Look at me. I'm right here. You are not leaving today. Stay with me." And she lived. Of course she lived. Not because Daniel was a hero, he'd stopped believing in that word, but because a broken man had chosen one terrible day 2 years ago to get up out of his seat and had spent every day since refusing to sit back down. That night, he came home to a house that was no longer quiet. Mia was doing homework at the table. There was music playing. Emma was over, and Victoria was coming for dinner, and the small kitchen, where a devastated man had once shaken a stranger's hand across a scratched table, was full now of the sound of a life that had somehow, against all the math, filled itself back up. Mia looked up when he came in. She could always read him. She always could. "You saved somebody today," she said. Not a question. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Yeah, baby, I did." "The man from the plane," she said, smiling, going back to her homework. "He's really good at his job." Daniel Hayes stood in his doorway and looked at his daughter and thought about his wife, whose dream now had a foundation with her name on it, and his father who'd told him in a dying breath that the door was open and dared him to walk through, and a woman who'd been dead on an airplane floor and had come back and dragged him back to life along with her. He thought about seat 31B and the 5 years he'd spent hiding and the small hand on his arm that had ended all of it. And he understood finally and completely the thing it had taken him, losing everything, to learn that the man who spends his whole life saving everyone else is sometimes the one who needs saving most of all, and that there is no shame, none, in letting the people who love you reach into your chest and refuse to let your heart stop. He'd flown to Chicago that day to watch his father die, an invisible man in seat 31B, certain his best days were buried on a bedroom floor, and his only job left was keeping the lights on. He'd been wrong about all of it. The lights he was meant to keep on were never the ones in a jet bridge. They were the ones in people, the flickering, failing, fighting lights of strangers on the worst day of their lives. And Daniel Hayes had come all the way back from the dead to keep them burning, and he was never ever going to hide again.